Good morning. I did wear my high heels, but I'm still a little short. I'm so excited and humbled to be with you here this morning. This is my third trip to Africa, and I will say again how very welcomed I feel, and I'm so excited to be part of this conference. I'm delighted and encouraged to see the work that you're doing with your students across the continent of Africa. While we serve in very different places, we're called to the same work, the work with our students, to call them and cultivate them in the love of God and in their understanding of the world. We're just starting our time here for these 2 days at the conference. We're going to hear many inspiring ideas, and I'm sure we're each going to collect a list of things that we would like to change when we go home. Isn't that what we do when we go to conferences? We collect a list of things we want to change. Sometimes we want to stop doing something, and then other times we want to start doing new things. And I know from experience that these conferences can be a little overwhelming at times. Right? We have so many new ideas and things that we want to do. I just want to encourage you that God has called us to this work. And even if we leave feeling a bit overwhelmed with all the things that we want to change, God will equip us to do the work that He has called us to. And He will bring the harvest from our work. Our labors don't depend on us, and they don't depend on our methods and our techniques. Our harvest will come because of God's work. Our labors are not in vain. So no matter how long your list of ideas is that you take home with you, I hope that you will leave the conference encouraged and renewed in your strength in your work. We can come to this work that God has called us to do with 3 reasons to be confident that classical Christian liberal arts education will bear fruit. First, our tradition honors the way human beings have been made by God. Those human beings include our students. This education aligns with their humanity. Second, we can be encouraged in our work because we're teaching our students about things that are real and permanent. Third, we can be encouraged in our work knowing that our hope is grounded in the work of our King Jesus. These 3 principles ought to encourage us, and we ought to be constantly looking to increase our own faithfulness to these things. I would like to comment just briefly on one of the differences between the classical liberal arts Christian education and progressive education. Progressive education is sadly a trail of theories and fads and methods, a series of new ideas about how education should be done, techniques that will work with children. Of course, some of these theories may work with children, but what progressive education really lacks is an overarching idea and purpose for what education is for, along with a proper understanding of human beings. Classical liberal arts education is not another theory to join all the rest. Christian liberal arts education is a tradition that we have inherited from centuries of Christians who came before us. It is not a method or a technique. It is rather an overarching way of going about education that honors our students' humanity, teaches them about things that are real and permanent, and submits to the lordship of our King Jesus. If we make the mistake of thinking that classical Christian education can be reduced to techniques, we will miss the true richness of our inheritance. We are not classical schools because we sing songs or chant little rhymes, or teach Latin, or teach rhetoric, or love old books. Those aren't the reasons that make us classical schools. We are classical schools because we submit to the standard of how God has made the world, the reality of how he has made the world, and we teach our students according to those realities. We're, of course, then free to borrow methods and techniques that align with that tradition. When we learn to think rightly about why we teach children, we can then figure out what to teach and how to teach. We must start with why. We hope that the next 2 days will strengthen all of our understandings about why we are teaching our students. Whether you're an experienced teacher, you've just taught maybe 2 months, or you're a veteran teacher who's taught for many decades, like me, you know that our work as educators is demanding and tiring. If you've taught more than 2 days, you know this, right? Part of this is because we tell our students what we want them to do, and then tomorrow we tell them the same thing that we want them to do, and the next day we tell them the same thing that we want them to do, right? The fruit of our labors grows very slowly in our work. I want to remind all of us, though, that we can depend on that fruit to grow because we are doing something that is very human. It's in line with how God created us to learn about the world. While the image of God in us is broken, and in our students, it is not gone. Education's proper goal is the restoration of the image of God in our students. Any other goal is too low, or at most, those other goals can be little side effects of the ultimate goal. Many people in your countries and my country would say that the only aim of education is to set our students up for economic success. Of course, we know that opportunity for better economic situations often does accompany education, but economic prosperity ought not be the only and primary and ultimate goal of our schools, because Jesus said, "What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul?" When education first aims at the restoration of God's image in the man or woman, the other effects of education will be gifts along the way. They can be enjoyed by us and our students and used for the good of others and all to the glory of God. Christian classical liberal arts education puts Christ at the center of all that we study. Mathematics are beautiful because they reveal the order and symmetry of God's creation, offering a glimpse of his mind. Of course, math is also useful, isn't it? Because the same God who made the world with its order made our minds to discover it. We were made to discover and delight in the order of numbers in the world. It's part of God's image in us. Thus, we join a long tradition of Christian educators who study all things for how they point to Jesus. John Milton wrote, "The end, then, of learning is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright." In other words, education's goal is to restore the image of God that was broken in the fall of man. Our humanity is partly repaired as we observe, study, and gain awe of the created world. Of course, we know that our humanity is only fully repaired through the work of Jesus. Another way that classical Christian education nurtures our humanity and our students is our focus on words. The verbal arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Our God is a God of words, isn't he? He speaks. He created language. and he made our minds to learn and use words. This is his image in us. Just as all humans are numbers people, we are also words people, all humans, numbers and words. When we learn the skills with numbers, we're learning the 4 liberal arts that we call the quadrivium. When we study words, when we're using words and learning the skills of words, we're learning the 3 liberal arts called the trivium. Those before us in the classical Christian tradition knew this importance of words, and so we inherit a verbally rich way of educating our students. We read books, old books, new books. We learn about the world through this reading. We teach our students to write so that they would be able to put on paper the words of their thoughts, offering them the opportunity to have their ideas read by someone else who's not in the same room, not in the same time and place that they are. We also have conversations because we learn by talking with one another. Your classrooms should be places of many, many words. Of course, sometimes we want our students to not use quite so many words, right? Right? So we want many words, but sometimes we need fewer words. Classical Christian education has always been built around conversations between teachers and students, conversations of a master teacher with his or her apprentice students. These conversations can be about any part of reality. It could be about the created world, it could be about mathematics or characters in literature or political governments. It might be about a classroom conflict that 2 of your students are having after playing a game at recess where one of them thought the ball was out fair and one thought it was foul. Those conversations. We can have conversations about a passage of scripture. All of these conversations and topics and infinitely more offer teachers an opportunity to talk with students about how the world works. We talk to our students about how the world ought to work, right, before the fall, how it works in a broken world, and how it will be restored through Jesus. Our calling to apprentice our students into reality, how things really are, not how the world portrays them to be. We need to apprentice them in submitting themselves to that reality. So let's think about some examples of how we do this. I have 3 young grandchildren. And of course, if we watch little children, we know that they're working to learn how the world works, aren't they? And so let's talk about gravity. Little children experiment by dropping things, right? They drop a toy, they drop food, and they are learning that every time it falls, right? Gravity. They're learning about gravity. I think when we're little, we wonder, maybe the next time it won't fall. And so we're learning by dropping things that they fall. Sometimes we learn that when we drop things, they break, right? We're learning about gravity. Little children learn that gravity is unrelenting. It always is working. This learning about gravity, though, is not just intellectual. It's experimental or experiential. It's poetic knowledge. And it also must involve submitting yourselves to that reality, right? We must submit ourselves to the facts of the world. It's real that gravity is working on us. We can't pretend that it is not. No matter how much a young boy wants to fly, he must submit to the laws of gravity, right? He can't just jump out of a tree and think, this time I will fly. Some people have tried that probably. Thus, teaching our students about real things also involves helping them to submit to those realities. They must conform themselves to what they learn. This is the second reason that we can be confident in our work, that it will be fruitful. We are teaching our students about real things. As we and our students learn about the real world and conform ourselves to it, fruit is born of our learning. So let's think about some other examples of how this would be true. Since we're talking about gravity, let's keep talking about gravity. I flew to Africa on an airplane. I looked up the details of this airplane, this particular model, and it is 64 meters long, 17 meters tall, and has a wingspan of 60 meters. It can hold up to 440 people, depending on how the seats are arranged. And it can take off when itself and its load weighs up to 235 metric tons. I think we're tempted to say that this machine defies gravity, aren't we? It seems too big. Gravity must not work on it. It's actually just the opposite. The engineers who designed this aircraft and built it very carefully submitted to the laws of gravity. But their learning had also included other principles of physics, things like lift and drag, and how to design this airplane so that those forces overcame the force of gravity. It was in submission to the reality of gravity that they were able to build a machine that could bring me from the United States to Kenya. Likewise, as we learn things about our human bodies, right? Medical treatments, effective medical treatments are born out of learning how our body really works and then submitting to that knowledge to find effective treatments for disease. We can apply this in so many different ways. This submission to reality is not simply about the physical world, though. There are realities in the social and moral realms to which we must also submit. One failure of progressive modern education can be seen in my country as people have been taught to not submit to the realities of the world. Instead, students are encouraged to defy those realities, deciding what is true for themselves. We might say that this is a crazy idea. We would never think it was okay to say, well, gravity is not true for me, right? We know that that is a crazy idea, but that is happening in the social and moral world. While there would be an outcry if an airline company decided to put a poorly designed aircraft into service, one that did not submit to the principles of physics, there isn't any outcry in my country about schools who teach students to defy social and moral realities like gender and sanctity of life. This is because modern progressive people have abandoned the belief that there is a reality outside of the physical world. We know better as Christians, and we must apprentice our students in all the realities of the world, physical, social, moral, and spiritual. We're apprenticing our students towards truth, beauty, and goodness. These are all permanent aspects of reality that find their embodiment in Jesus. This apprenticeship in reality is also a very human endeavor. God has designed us to imitate other people. So I will give you another story about a grandchild. Grandparents have to do this, right? So my little granddaughter, when she was probably still 1 year old, we saw her doing this. She did not have a watch, but her people have watches, right? Her people, her mom and her dad and her Aunt Erin, her grandma, She calls Bobby. We have watches, and we look at our watches, and so she looks at her watch that is not there. This is how we learn, isn't it? We imitate. Little children are imitating their parents and other adults all the time. God made us this way. The Apostle Paul exhorts the Corinthians to follow him as he follows Christ. We ought to be able to say to our students, "Follow me as I follow Christ." This brings us to another very human aspect of our work, that of stories. We've been created with a longing for a good story. Since the beginning of time, children have loved listening to adults tell the stories of their families, their tribes, their nations. We have epic poems and literature plots, movies, stories. They all draw us into the stories of other people. We long for the resolution of a good story, don't we? This love of stories puts us squarely into the classical Christian tradition, as those stories come to us from other places and other times. We must include stories as a part of all that we teach. We shouldn't just teach our students what is currently known about in math and science, for instance. We must offer them the stories of discovery in the natural world. To connect with my earlier comments about airplanes, it is fascinating to read about all the people throughout history who have tried different ways of flying, isn't it? And so we must teach our students those stories. A couple of years ago, I enjoyed reading the book, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, an account of a young boy from Malawi whose reading spurred him to experiment with the generation of electricity with the windmill. These stories captivate the imaginations of our students and inspire them to learn about the physical world themselves. We learn the stories of our own people, but we also learn the stories of people who are very different from us. These stories help us to see the common struggles and longings of all people, even when their circumstances and cultures are very different. We learn that our stories are not the only stories. Even greater than our longing is our desire, than that longing to know our own stories is our desire to know, am I part of a grand story? What is the end of my own story? We all have this longing, and so do our students. Herein lies our greatest calling. We can help our students learn not only words and numbers, we can help them know the only story in which those words and numbers make sense, the story of Christ our King. And so we ought to be encouraged that the work of classical Christian education aligns with the way that human beings were created to use words, created to use numbers, and created to love stories. We should also be encouraged because we're teaching our students about real and permanent things. But the biggest reason for us to have hope amidst our labors is that the most important story, the one of creation, fall, and redemption, governs all that we do. I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about the virtue of hope, its foundation, and its impact on our efforts in classical Christian education. First, we must talk a little bit about the word hope. For our purposes today, I will distinguish between three uses of the word. The first use is just that of wishful thinking, something that I just want to be true. So I might say, I hope it doesn't rain today while I'm out walking. There's no basis really for me to have that hope, except that I just want it to be true. These wishes can be for good things or bad things, but this sort of hope is not the same thing as the virtue of hope. The second use of the word hope is for things that we might call natural hopes. Natural hopes are for good things, things that are gifts from God. A young woman, for instance, might rightly hope to be married someday. Marriage is a gift from God. It's a good and right hope, but it is still not the ultimate hope. The final use of the word hope is that of supernatural hope. This hope is theological, and it's grounded in the character of God and the promises that he has made. This hope is always virtuous. So when we're talking about the virtue of hope, it's this hope that we're talking about. We are hoping creatures, but whether that hope is virtuous has everything to do with where our hopes are aimed. We can put our hopes in the wrong things, can't we? And that sort of hope is not a virtue. Hope is either theological, or it's either a theological virtue or it's no virtue at all. Hope is the virtue of pilgrims on a journey. We are on our way somewhere to eternal happiness with God, but we haven't yet arrived. I know many of you have come on a journey to come to this conference. I think some of you came by road. Is that right, from Tanzania? How many hours was that trip? How many hours? 8 hours. That's a long road trip. And some of you came by air, and those were long flights, I'm sure. Don't we all say, are we there yet? How much longer? Right? We know what it is to be on a journey, and we know what it is to hope for the destination. We are on a journey, and we haven't arrived yet, so we live in hope. Christ is both the foundation and the fulfillment of this hope. When supernatural hope surrounds the natural goods of life, those goods become faint foreshadows of our ultimate happiness in God. We might say that just like our loves have to be in the right order, our hopes have to be in the right order also. Many songs and stories express the idea of a journey. We have several hymns that you probably know. Come Thou Fount says, by your help I've come to this place, and I'm also prone to wander, right? Come Thou Fount is that on a journey. We have another hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, names the singers as pilgrims in this weary land. So many of our songs and stories have this idea of being on a journey. We know that this world is not our home, and so we sing of God's guidance on our way. This is hope. Literature is full of stories of men or animals finding their way home. Aren't there many books for young children about a little duckling or a little chick who's looking for his mother? Being on a journey is a popular theme of many stories. Homer's ancient Odyssey is a grand tale of a man trying to get back to his home after fighting in a war. Hope is the virtue of the not yet. We are on our way, but we have not arrived yet. We're confident about the destination, but it's not ours to possess yet. And so we do not despair, and we do not arrogantly act as if there isn't a journey or any struggle on the way. While this fulfillment of our hope is not yet achieved, and we're pilgrims, there is a certainty bound up in this supernatural hope. This certainty sits on top of the certainty of our faith and our belief, and that is founded on the character of God. He swears by himself, and he cannot lie. Hebrews chapter 6 and 10 both speak about the assurance of hope and the confidence that believers have. It says, a sure and steadfast anchor for our souls. Those who hope are confident because Jesus is ahead of us. He's the forerunner on our behalf. I'll return to Hebrews 10 in a few minutes, but chapters 7, 8, and 9 of Hebrews lay out why we can depend on our forerunner, Jesus. He's the perfect high priest, and he's the perfect sacrifice. He has secured the anchor of hope for his followers. Supernatural hope, with its eye on eternal happiness in God, is characterized by youthfulness that comes from a certainty of knowing that when our outer man is wasting away, the inner man is renewed day by day. Hope is at work when we can say about our struggles that they are light and momentary trials when compared with the glory that awaits us. A Christian that lived in the 16th century developed a series of meditation practices by which Christians were supposed to imagine scenes of the goodness of creation, of their own deaths, and of the final judgment and eternal life. The purpose of these practices was to engender and build hope. We ought to consider ways that we can similarly fill our students' imaginations with scenes that build hope. At first thought, it might seem odd that contemplating our death is a source of hope, but both the scriptures and Christian writers throughout history have made that connection for us. The psalmist writes, "Teach me to number my days, that I might live aright." There's a straight line from thinking rightly about death and the resurrection to hope. They're connected. Modern society is full of trying to deny death, isn't it not? Or pretending that that we aren't going to die. Avoiding thoughts about death, though, robs us of contemplating the heights of the good news of the gospel and of the resurrection, and the great hope that the good news inspires. Each person has dignity and uniqueness as God's image bearer. Death is the great enemy, but Jesus has defeated death on our behalf. Purpose is to be found not in being the center of the universe ourselves, but by being joined to Christ, who is the center of the universe. We therefore no longer need to live as if this material world is all there is, or in acting as if death, along with its companion side effects of sickness and struggle, will not hit us. Hopelessness flows out of a distorted view of God's nature, doesn't it? One who believes that God is only just and without mercy will be hopeless in despair, as redemption is not possible as they think about that. On the other hand, one who believes that God is only merciful and without any justice, they'll move into hopeless presumption because they don't need redemption. They don't think they need it. Again, a proper understanding of the gospel and a robust imagination about the implications of the gospel guards us against hopelessness. Fear of the Lord, not the Lord of our own making or our own imagination, but the Lord of the scriptures, will protect us from hopelessness. All of Romans 8 would be fitting here, but I shall just read a few verses. The Apostle Paul writes, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?" To gain this proper fear of the Lord, we must be people of the Bible. We must know God as he has revealed himself in the Holy Scriptures. We must understand the gospel and also the promises of God about the future. This is not wishful thinking. This will fill us with hope. The Rafiki curriculum does just this. It is centered around the Bible. And as students are learning about the created world and the works of God through his works of people throughout history, they're learning to fear God by coming to know him. Now let's go back to Hebrews for a second. The declaration about the sure and steady anchor for our souls in chapter 6 is followed by the 3 chapters about Jesus as the perfect high priest and the perfect sacrifice, the one who has already entered behind the curtain. The writer then goes in Hebrews 10 to the topic of hope. The reader is to hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Immediately, then, we're told to spur one another on to love and good deeds. This could be called the virtuous life. We're called to meet together, to encourage one another, and to stop sinning as we see the day or the end of our pilgrimage approaching. We hope that part of what we gain here at this conference is to spur one another on to loving good deeds, to carry on in our work that we've been called to do. This should make us yearn to see our students and ourselves in healthy churches that teach and practice in ways that fuel hope, so that we can say with the writer of Hebrews, but we're not ones who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and persevere in their souls, preserve their souls. So how will our lives and the lives of our students look if virtuous hope is increasing? First, I believe that we will have growing contentment, as both our hardships and our pleasures are experienced against the glories of eternal life. Even as we grow in contentment, we will be free to pour out our resources for the benefit of others. For contentment doesn't mean that we're complacent about the hardships of our fellow man. So service will flow out of our hope. In addition to contentment, we can let go of worry. Worry is actually about future hardship. When hope grows out of an understanding of the good but arduous, hard journey, our coming deaths and the glorious eternal life, we can argue from the greater to the lesser. Jesus has conquered the greatest or biggest worst thing, death. How could we not trust that he has the more immediate dangers also in hand? And so I conclude with an encouragement to you in your work as classical Christian educators. What you are doing is a good endeavor. You are honoring the humanity of your students by teaching them the skills of words and numbers and by giving them a love of stories. You're teaching them about real and permanent things, the realities of the physical world, along with the unseen realities and the character of God. And this good endeavor is done in the sure and steadfast hope that is grounded in the promises of God. He will finish the work that he has started. I want to end by reading a couple verses from Psalm 22 that I hope will be an encouragement. The next generation will be told about the Lord. They will come and declare his righteousness. To a people yet to be born, they will declare what he has done. And so as we leave and we do our work, we do it with the hope that our students will tell the next generation. They will declare the righteousness of the Lord to a people yet to be born. May he encourage you in these days of the conference, and may you return to your schools with renewed enthusiasm for your callings. Thank you.